Hello everyone. Today we're going to be analyzing the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and connecting it to The Wars by Timothy Finley, alongside ideas from the short story The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant and other ENG4U texts that we've read. This presentation will include a summary of the poem, use of literary theories, poetic and literary devices, and themes and character journeys that link these texts together. Coleridge's narrative poem follows an old sailor, the ancient mariner, who stops a wedding guest to tell a haunting story from his past. The mariner recounts how his ship was driven into icy waters where he killed an albatross, a bird considered to be a good omen. This act curses the ship and its crew. His crewmate dies and he is left alone, haunted by guilt. Supernatural forces torment him, ghostly figures, voices, and hallucinations. Eventually, he repents by appreciating the beauty of nature. The curse lifts, but his punishment remains. He's left to wander the earth, compelled to tell and retell his story as a warning to others. This poem explores themes of guilt, redemption, nature, and spiritual awakening, which we're now going to connect to the wars and the necklace. Okay, now starting with the literary theories. We're going to start with a psychoanalytical lens. Through this lens, we examine characters' unconscious thoughts and desires and their guilt and their internal conflicts within themselves. Starting with the poem. The mariner, he suffers immense guilt. He's compelled to tell his story and retell his story, which could show trauma and repression. The hallucinations he sees at sea reflect a fractured psyche, which is like guilt made physical. In the wars, Robert Ross, he's stunned by grief from his sister's death, and he blames himself. His detachment from others, his obsession with animals, especially horses, these reflect guilt. Lastly, in The Necklace, Mathilde's fantasies of wealth and her insecurities about her own class, those could reflect her conflicts within herself. Her suffering is a psychological cost of wanting what society tells her she deserves, but she can't have. Now let's compare the three through a Marxist lens. This lens offers class conflict, power, and social inequality. In the rhyme, the mariner, his reckless decision affects the entire crew. One of them even died. This shows how the mistake of one powerful could impact the powerless, the rest. Secondly, in the wars, class shapes survival. The wealthier officers, they're more distanced from horror and the brutality of war, while the low-end soldiers, they're at the front line and eventually most of them die. War itself is a tool and it's fought by the poor. In The Necklace, Mathilde's downfall is rooted in her want and her desire to appear upper class. This false necklace becomes a symbol of the bourgeois illusion, which destroys the working class people who chase it. This theme of materialism and class oppression unites all three stories together. Now for the reader's response. This lens focuses on how you interpret the text. This could be based on your background, your religion, your values, your morals, how you were brought up. As readers, for the poem, we might either pity or blame the mariner. This depends on how we understand guilt and punishment, how you were brought up. In the wars, we either judge Robert for some of his choices or we understand him and feel for him. Some could see him as a victim, but some see him as, what are you doing? Like how in the book, he died while everyone hated him. The Necklace, this could be written as like a cautionary tale or a tragic injustice. This depends on how we interpret class, pride, and gender roles as well. This lens reminds us that our meaning isn't fixed. We could judge a character based on our morals and our mindset. Okay, now moving on to the literary devices and the poetic devices. So, one literary device that is shown throughout all three of these pieces of work could be symbolism. There are multiple symbols in each, but I'm just going to pick out one from each. So, in the poem, the clearest one was the albatross, and this symbolizes innocence and spiritual connection. Its death brought guilt. Second was, in the wars, is horses. Horses, they represent innocence and nature and emotional damage caused by the war. For example, Robert, he had such a hard time to kill a horse. Even when he was instructed to by his superiors, he couldn't hurt a horse. And finally, in the necklace itself, it represents false value. It represents how it gives the theme of how materialism could lead to destruction. And the final poetic device that I'll be focusing on in literary device is repetition. So in the poem, a key poetic device that was used is repetition. And this was used to highlight the emotional intensity and important themes, and to emphasize important themes and situations. So, for example, Coleridge, he uses repetition to highlight the mariner's feelings of isolation. So, the repetition of phrase alone, alone, all alone is repetition, and this underscores the mariner's profound sense of isolation after killing the albatross. He also uses it for us so that we could picture the danger that the soldiers face. So the repeated phrase, the ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. This emphasizes that the sailors, they felt trapped and kind of helpless. In the wars, Timothy Finley uses repetition to serve as a tool to reinforce themes and create specific tones. The author uses repetition of not only phrases but also images to reinforce the idea that the war had a psychological toll on soldiers and its impact on individuals such as Robert. So there's certain phrases that are repeated throughout the entire book, just like the smell of death, the horses, or the fire. And these are repeated throughout the novel. And every time the reader reads this phrase, they remember, and it creates kind of like cycling suffering, and it creates like it shows that there's trauma that endured and was present throughout the whole book. There's also repetition of images. So there's visual images such as Robert's face burnt. And this is repeatedly used to symbolize the disfigurement and the psychological scars that are left by war. Okay, now we can move on to the shared themes. So a theme that I found present throughout all of them was guilt and psychological punishment. So in the poem, the mariner, he's forced to retell his story. And this is a curse. And I see that this is motivated by guilt. Robert, he feels a lot of guilt. We've already talked about this. He's haunted by his sister's death and by war, and he suffers a psychological war, and he punishes himself throughout the whole book by remembering and feeling like kind of depressed and bad about himself, even though his sister's death wasn't his fault. Mathilde, in the short story, she's punished for her pride, even though the necklace was fake. Each of these characters, they lived their whole life in inner torment. It's a psychological conflict within themselves, more than even external judgments. Another theme that we could see from the Marxist lens is class and power. So in The Mariner, the decision of one sailor, of one man, he destroyed the life of many. Okay? In the wars, we could see that, as I explained, the lower class soldiers, they're the ones that suffer. They're the ones at war. And in the necklace, Mathilde, she wanted to have a social class that was higher than hers, which led her into much trouble. Now I'm going to summarize the character arc from the poem, and then I'm going to compare it to the rest. So in the Rime and the Ancient Mariner, The mariner, he starts off as arrogant and impulsive, and he kills the albatross without any reason at all. His guilt then grows as the natural and supernatural world, they punish him. His transformation comes only after suffering and spiritual revelation, spiritual awakening. We can see this in the quote, "He prayeth well, he loveth well, both man and bird and beast." So he starts to wander, and he's forced to tell and retell his story as a never-ending punishment. It's kind of like psychological exile. Okay, now for Robert Ross in The Wars, the character arc. Robert, he begins as a naive and idealistic young man. He's innocent and he has good morals, especially in the way he treats animals and his family. But then war, it exposes him to internal conflict and to horror. His moral core deteriorates, and he is forced to become traumatized and commit brutal acts, just like blowing the barn on fire or killing innocent animals like horses. He ends alienated, and he is tormented and broken by trauma. Just like the mariner, he becomes a witness of senseless suffering. So to compare both characters, they suffer psychological damage from their environments, the sea versus the war. And this isolates them and builds up guilt and trauma. Robert's trauma, though, unlike the mariner, he's forced to be silent, and he doesn't compulsively retell and storytell his story. This could be symbolized as the infidelity of war. Now, the character arc in The Necklace. Mathilde, she begins as vain and dissatisfied, and she dreams of the upper class poverty. This causes her to, after lose the necklace, she spends 10 years in poverty only to find out the necklace was fake. So her transformation, I saw that it's more like external. It's not clearly internal. We don't know if she becomes any humbler or bitter. Okay? Now to compare the both. Just like the mariner and Robert, Mathilde's actions, they set in motion unforeseen consequences, just like borrowing the necklace, killing the albatross, or joining the army. These all made the characters into deep trouble. Her downfall is driven by social illusion, not moral or spiritual sin, which is more of like we could see this from a Marxist lens. So, in conclusion, I could say that all three protagonists, they experience a journey from illusion to painful truth. So, each one is blinded by, in the mariner, he's blinded by spiritual arrogance. Robert, the belief in duty and heroism, and the necklace, envy and want for upper class, like materialism. All these three stories highlight emotional toll of trauma, guilt, and disillusionalism. All right, now my final thoughts. All three of these works, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, The Wars, and The Necklace, show that illusion can destroy, guilt can consume, and pride often leads to our own downfall. So whether it's killing a bird, trusting in the war, like a wrong system, or wearing a fake necklace, each character, they made a grave mistake and they had to pay for it deeply. These stories challenge us to look at our own values and guilt and our social status and the way it shapes us to see the world and how we judge those who fall. Thank you so much for listening.